This week on Inside Olympia, what is it like to be a first-year lawmaker? What are the challenges, the opportunities, the surprises, and the lessons learned? We put those questions and more to 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who were new to the legislature this year.
From the TVW studio, it's Inside Olympia with host Austin Jenkins.
And welcome to Inside Olympia. It's not easy being new, but what is it like being a new state lawmaker? How do you learn to navigate the State House? How do you get a bill passed? What are the challenges and opportunities that come with being new? After one session, what are the lessons learned? This hour, we'll ask 4 new state lawmakers, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Joining me first is Republican State Representative April Connors from the Tri-Cities and Republican State Representative Travis Couture of Mason County. Welcome both of you to Inside Olympia. Good to see you. And
Thanks,
congratulations on surviving session 1 and a special session, a bonus session. I guess mercifully it was just one day because I've seen them run longer. But nice to have you. Let me just start by hearing a little bit about your backgrounds and what brought you to the state legislature. Start with you. Why do you want to be a legislator? What led to that?
I have always had an interest. I have helped a couple of other folks with campaigns, including a friend of mine that ran for city council, my husband who is the president of our local school board, and I have always had an interest in serving. I have not held a public office before, so just jumped right in and ran directly for state legislature. I really just wanted to serve our community and bring important things back and try to help out wherever I can, especially in the housing arena. I know this year was a big year for housing in the state legislature, and
you work in the real estate business.
Correct. I am a real estate agent by trade. Prior to that, I worked for a large commercial development company as well. So that being right in my wheelhouse, that was a big piece that I wanted to bring here this year.
Anything in particular, coming from the Tri-Cities, having a background in housing, being a Republican in a state that's run by Democrats, anything in particular that you wanted to work on or that you were talking about on the campaign trail as an issue that you thought you could add value when you came to Olympia?
Sure. One of the big things is affordable housing, and I did run one bill this year that was called a Home for Heroes bill. It was a bill to help with a down payment assistance program for a lot of folks that helped during COVID-19. People we relied upon, police officers, firefighters, nurses, home health care workers, and daycare workers. That one unfortunately made it all the way to capital budget but didn't make it on. But I am interested in helping in affordable housing. As a freshman, we get here and a lot of bills seem to be set or already in the works by the time we get here. So next year I'm really looking forward to coming back. I have a ton of ideas, especially to help in that arena.
And affordable housing is not just a West Side issue.
Correct.
Okay. Representative Couture, what brought you have a background in the Navy. You represent a district that includes parts of Thurston, Mason, and Kitsap counties. You happen to live in Mason County. But what's your path and journey to the State House?
Yeah, so I've been involved with local politics in the 35th District for a little over a decade now. I helped my seatmate get elected, Representative Griffey, a while back, so that's how I kind of cut my teeth into campaigns and state politics. And professionally, I'm a program manager for Lockheed Martin at the submarine base in Silverdale. So I work in Kitsap, I live in Mason, but I also during the session work in Thurston County. So I'm all over my district all the time. But the 35th District has a lot of Navy veterans in it because it's bookended by 2 large bases, well 3 really, with the sub base, PSNS, and then JBLM on the other end. So we have a lot of veterans in our district, and with my program management experience, I felt like now was the time, and I had a lot to offer my community. And so I serve on 2 budget committees, which are kind of in my wheelhouse, and I'm really passionate about my policy committees as well, which surround issues for education and kids.
Got it. Was there one particular issue? Obviously you mentioned veterans, but was there one particular compelling issue or reason that you wanted to be in the legislature?
I think there's a lot of different issues. I think there's not really one exact issue, but a lot of them kind of added together. Certainly, April mentioned housing being a big issue in Olympia or for Washington State. But also what animates me is the things that we see happening right now in our communities surrounding law enforcement, public safety, the homelessness, opioid crisis. Those things touch every district and every community, no matter if they're rural or urban. Sometimes, representing a rural community, one of my biggest, fights is to go represent rural values and traditions and rural communities in Olympia. And so that's what I came here to do. Sometimes we have all of the same problems as all of the urban districts, but not the same amount of resources to tackle those problems. So I worked really hard this year to ensure that our rural communities get the resources that they need.
Great. So let me start by asking you, maybe not the obvious next question, but I'd kind of like to get it out of the way. What is it like to be in the minority? You come as a new member, you've got lots of ideas, you're ready to go, and then, you kind of run into this reality, which is that your party doesn't wield the gavel, doesn't set the agenda, doesn't chair the committees. And so I'm curious about what that's like and then how you navigate that if you want to be successful as a first-year Republican lawmaker. Representative Connors, what's your observation about that?
Well, obviously, creating policy when you're in the minority is much harder. I was pleasantly surprised this year, not knowing what to expect. We had a really large freshman class coming in. We had a freshman orientation that we all went through that really allowed us to collaborate and make some really good friendships this year before we got here. And then just working through the bill process, I was surprised the kind of support. I think we're going to talk about one of my bills today that I had during that process from the majority party. The collaboration I felt was really well. There were not a lot of times I felt that I wasn't heard. So I was very pleasantly surprised by the relationships made and the work that we all did together this year. There's certainly those aspects of, the 80-20 Ronald Reagan rule, where there's 80% of the things that we're agreeing on and moving towards and 20% that we're not. Now, would I like to pass more policy and have a bigger influence? Absolutely.
Well, in that 80-20 rule, it's interesting to hear you say that as a new legislator, because that is something you consistently hear in Olympia from people who've been here for a short period of time or a long period of time, that really is very consistent. And it's a good reminder that while the fights are big and people feel strongly, most of the stuff pretty bipartisan. The other thing that strikes me about coming in this year, and in many respects you were lucky because this is the first session when everybody was back in person. Imagine being a first-year member when you were trying to do it via Zoom, not really getting to develop those relationships, and perhaps there was some exuberance on both sides that, everybody's back in person and they were feeling particularly friendly. I don't know. But what was it like for you? And especially kind of with that lens of being not, you're in your district, you're in the majority, right? Republicans are getting elected out of the 35th. You come here, you're like, oh, it's my caucus, but it's not the majority of seats on the floor.
Yeah, I think, as a freshman, we went through the orientation, but there's still a level of uncertainty as you gavel in and get going. And, I'm lucky to have good people in my caucus surrounding me that, help kind of mold us freshmen and help us out along the way, no matter what problems may arise. But, it's controlled chaos, and there's rules, unsaid rules, and then there's politics. And so trying to navigate all three of those things and be successful. But, I think although it would be great to be in the majority, obviously, because then you have committee chairs and the gavel and everything else. I think one of the blessings in disguise of being in the minority is, having to constantly, no matter what policy agenda you have, knowing in the back of your head that no matter what you do, you have to find a way to be bipartisan and strike a balance. And so striking a balance is really important for me, and I know it is for many people in Olympia, despite which party they're in. It's about building those relationships with not only your members of your own caucus, but members of the other caucus as well, and the staff, and trying to sit down and work hard to find, solutions that, although we don't have control over the broader policy agenda, but, there are things that we can do and be creative and work together on. And so I think many of us found ways to do that this year. And like Representative Connors said, that, sitting on the House floor, every single floor session, you see that, a majority of the time we're voting together as both sides on common sense things. And yeah, there's that 20%, we have a food fight over. But at the same time, you got to be able to have those fights and have those debates and then still maintain those relationships so that you can work on other policy agendas.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk more about policy, but before we do that, let me ask you, do you have a story from your first year? It could be funny, it could be just revealing about what it's like to be new. It doesn't have to be I couldn't find the bathroom the first day story, but is there sort of a moment that stands out in this first 105-day session? Or an anecdote that you would share? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but what pops to mind? Either of you have
at each other for
bail me out.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I guess I'll go first. I think that, there's a lot of little funny things that happen along the way. Sometimes I get really excited about things, and I remember sitting in my capital budget committee, and it was the first time a student from actually my kid's school district came to testify in committee on the capital budget on a matter about schools. Mm-hmm. And I got really excited that someone from the North Mason School District was there. And, some of the rules like, hey, if you're in committee, you have to ask a question. Well, I think I had actually a speech and not a question, but then ended it with, how say you? And so, but, I think I asked him, go Bulldogs, do you agree? And so.
And the chair, I imagine, gave you a little latitude.
Yeah. And, I actually, I think I hold the record for getting my leader gavelled as he walked in front of me in my floor desk.
Oh, that's funny.
Standing up to speak a little too quick and couldn't get out of the way. So those little moments are funny. And, we're kind of like, the caucus is kind of like a big family. And so it's already, the 105-day session is grinding enough, so it's nice to have those kind of moments of levity.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to ask the same question of you, but I also am mindful of the fact that you live a lot farther away from Olympia than many of your colleagues, and so there's a certain extra burden and sacrifice there. You got to find housing. You have to figure out when you can go back on weekends. But is there something that jumps out at you?
Well, like Rep. Couture said, there were a lot of fun, more levity style things that happened this year. And one of them was I had a marble white elephant in my office. And it became the caucus joke almost, where I would come back, my elephant would be gone, I'd have to find the elephant. I think I know who's the original, pilferer of the elephant. And
brings
then,
you meaning to the idea of the white elephant, right?
And just fun, fun things that you do that you're going to remember. I wrote a speech. Rep. Couture remembers for Rep. Corey on a Taylor Swift speech for a bill and appropriations. You might want to go back and find it. It was kind of fun. But I mean, just those moments. I think of it's a bonding moment for our caucus and ourselves.
You got to try to have a little fun too, right? Okay, so policy. You hinted at your bill, and we'll start with that, which did get a lot of, not only did it get passed, it got a lot of press, and it had to do with, I'll have you explain, but you live in the land of windmills. Correct. And they have lights on them.
Correct.
That will be your prompt.
There you go. So I do live in the land of windmills with lights on them. However, I had it back in December. I had some constituents come to me in Tri-Cities. They're trying to put a giant wind turbine farm on the Horse Heaven Hills. And some of these turbines are as tall as the Space Needle, or twice as tall as the Capitol building, if you can imagine. Wow. And if you haven't seen them at night when they flash, they look like aliens coming over the top of the
There's a UFO landing.
Yes, and they go on from dawn to dusk. And so...
And ostensibly this is to warn aircraft?
Correct.
Not to make you think that there's a UFO landing.
Correct. So to warn aircraft so they know they're there. And our constituents had done some research, and they found that Colorado and North Dakota had passed laws regarding putting automatic detection lighting systems on them for the airplanes. So when the airplanes are about 3.5 miles out, the system detects them, turns the lights on. When they safely pass, they go back off. They say that the lights will be off 94% of the time that way. So when we ran the bill, it was important to me not only to help protect our Horse Heaven Hills, if those wind farm does manage to go there, but also back and forth to Walla Walla. The first time that I saw them, my husband and I were driving back and forth to Walla Walla, and we looked over and I actually grabbed his arm because I thought they were, I'm like, what is going on the hillside? And he said, well, those are the wind turbines. And so it was really important to me, and it was a pretty big fight to get existing turbines retrofitted. And so that was one of the big wins of the bill, not just new turbines, but by 2028, every turbine in Washington state that the FAA will allow the system to be on, because it's important that we keep our planes safe, will have that system on them.
So how did you get, I mean, this sounds sort of like, you can explain this one, that's better than a lot of legislation, but it also sounds like it could be potentially really complicated. There could be all these implications. You could have pushback from industry, aviation. I mean, so I'm kind of curious, like, how did this, and you're not in that, you know, you don't have the advantage of being in the majority. How did you get this one through in one session?
Well, that's what everybody keeps saying. This should be a 3 or 4 year bill, and you did it in 4 months. I worked with the governor's office. I worked with FSAC. I worked with Ecology, as well as you know, all of our big Washington State energy companies, Puget Sound Energy, Energy Northwest, Pacificor. A lot weren't very excited about it at first because it is going to cost money for those facilities, but our local Washington State companies found it to be a really good neighbor bill to do the right thing, as more of these turbines are going to have to be sited. Where I got most of my pushback was from the independent power producers, and those are the producers that come into Washington State, aren't necessarily providing power to Washington State or putting it onto the grid line to help other states' green energy credits. And so I think their worry is if Washington passes retroactive, then other states may soon follow.
Suit, yes.
Yeah.
Got it. Just briefly, the issue, the concern is light pollution, not just people thinking that there's something weird going on. Yeah.
Correct. It's light pollution.
And the airlines or the aviation world was okay with this?
Aviation world was surprisingly really okay with it. This technology has been available for a while. Germany has it on all onshore and offshore turbines. Other states are using them in the United States without having to put laws in place. Some power producers are being good neighbors already. The FAA, it starts with them, and they immediately, the first thing they do is contact the Department of Defense and make sure there's not a military route right next to where they're going. And then once the FAA approves, then the systems have been really successful.
And just lastly, you did get the experience of getting your bill signed, but with some vetoes?
I did have a surprise veto.
Okay, so
I didn't know it was happening when I was up there, but luckily for me, our staff was with me. I had OPR staff and our Republican policy staff in the room. So as soon as I looked down and I saw one section was an emergency clause, and so
which would make it go into effect right away.
Immediately, and the governor had been vetoing a lot of emergency clauses this year. But the other one, Section 3, I immediately, you could go back and watch a video. I'm turned around talking to policy staff about it, and because you know their job is incredible what they do for us. But policy staff knew immediately it was the governor took away a little bit of local control that we had, basically on the siting of or not the siting, but the level of light mitigation that might be allowed on the turbines.
Okay.
So.
You still accepted the pen from the governor, though?
I know, that's why I had to look back and say, Section 3, should I be smiling in this picture or not? Yes,
what's my cue?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's okay. Perhaps a less fun topic, and not necessarily, well, it is bill related, it didn't pass, but an issue that you have been very involved in, that we've been talking about on this program for the last few weeks, is the issue of sex offender placement in communities, specifically those coming out of the Special Commitment Center who have been civilly committed under the state sexually violent predator statute. One of these potential sightings was going to be in Tenino in your district, and you kind of took the lead for your caucus in fighting this and trying to get some legislation introduced. Tell us a little bit about the backstory here.
Yeah, so as people may or may not know, and as you alluded to, there's people housed at McNeil Island who have a designation sexually violent predator. They've committed crimes in the past, but they're no longer incarcerated, they're civilly committed because courts have deemed that they're likely to reoffend. And so on McNeil Island, they live in the Special Commitment Center or the SCTF, also on McNeil Island. And what's happening right now is a law that was passed in 2021 saying that there's a fair share rule amongst counties, and that we have to start releasing under certain conditions some of these sexually violent predators into LRAs, or a less restrictive alternative.
And there's really just, sorry to interrupt, but there's kind of two pieces to this. One is the fair share piece, and then the other is the state is now required, rather than having the burden be on the defense attorneys, but the state has to be planning for their release really from day one now, which kind of creates two probably toggle switches that are leading to more releases back into the community.
Yeah, and so once there's a team comprised of Department of Corrections, DSHS, the courts, the SVP's Defense Counsel, basically looking at I'll call it a package of should this person be released into an LRA. And so, funny, I'm literally 3 days into my first session, and I get a flurry of emails and meeting requests about SVPs, and I didn't even actually know what it was at the time. And so I had to learn pretty quickly on the fly about the whole issue and the history of it. And so my residents down in south of my district in Tenino, there was a company called Supreme Living that was going to contract with DSHS to provide LRA housing. And when we say LRA housing, I think it's important to note that the house that Supreme Living bought is essentially a 3-bedroom A-frame house. It's a bungalow. I mean, and it didn't have a full fencing around it or really any other security measures. And inevitably, the end of the story is that the Thurston County government put a lot of red tape around that for lack of water and septic and other things. And so, but my residents are a little upset about that because there was no public notice. So I dropped a bill saying we should have public notice. That did not get a hearing, but it was bipartisan. I had Democrats and Republicans on that bill. And then myself and my seatmate, Representative Griffey, we worked together on a bill for a moratorium and a study. Kind of pump the brakes a bit and let's look at, are we doing the right thing? Is there a different way we can do it? And get all the stakeholders at the table to see if there was a way that we can do this, respect the constitutional rights of people, but also protect the public safety and make sure our residents aren't thrown off guard and that these places are sited in the correct areas. And so, and I know there was a similar issue up in Enumclaw, and there's the little spots around the state where this is kind of rearing its head. And I think the message was loud and clear. My constituents were left, right, and center, kind of represented on the issue, and they wanted somebody to fight for them to ensure that LRAs like this don't end up right in their neighborhood in a rural area with no services around, that they end up in places where they're appropriate. And many believe that we should stick to what voters approved, and that is to put these people on McNeil Island. And I understand that it is an expense, but some people believe that you can't put a price tag on feeling safe.
The bills did not pass. There's clearly a conversation ongoing about the placement of these individuals on these less restrictive alternatives. I mean, keeping them on the island may not be constitutional or practical in the long term. They're there so long as they have been committed, but when it's time to release them, coming back into the community very likely will be what happens. But where do you see the conversation and the opportunity during the interim to advance the conversation?
Yeah, I think that I still believe that doing a moratorium and having all the stakeholders come together is still a valid idea. I think at the time, and I think it's important for people to understand that if you introduce a bill in January, you have to still make it by a cutoff.
There are cutoffs, yeah,
and
there are
so,
deadlines.
I mean, a substantial policy like that, you would have worked in the interim had I already been elected, or had we known about it.
Right, had it not shown up 3 days
I think there's some interim cleanup to do on some of these policies and some discussions to have, but I But I did have a discussion with the governor in which Representative Connors was there for that discussion, and we talked about not only the light pollution bill, but also the sexually violent
But this
predator
is interesting.
problem.
So 2 brand new Republican state lawmakers had a meeting with the governor.
For about an hour.
Wow.
And it was a good meeting. I asked for help on any one of the 3 of bills on the sexually violent predator issue that we had introduced, and ultimately didn't get that help. But I'm kind of hopeful that we can come back with some of those agencies and see if there's things that we can do to ensure that the constituents in our communities feel safe.
Okay. Just briefly, so we don't end on a note about what you didn't pass. You did get a bill through on child malnutrition. You want to just briefly tell us about that?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's kids that tragically and needlessly die in our state of malnutrition, especially as it centers around child abuse. Food is used as a weapon sometimes amongst families in our state, and it's wrong. This bill really came from a story about Carry-On Franks, who was 15 years old, lived with adoptive parents, and was autistic. And so he couldn't really speak up for himself. And him and his siblings were abused over more than a 3-year period while under supervision of CPS and Department of Children, Youth, and Families in our state. And a week before Carry-On died, he died of, he was seen by a CPS agent where they just didn't have the tools to help or to recognize. And so a week later, he died of malnutrition, very sad and tragic, very abusive household. And part of the Child Fatality Review Board recommendation was that, hey, these social workers, these CPS agents, didn't know how to spot child malnutrition and didn't know how to report it. So what the bill does is creates a field guide for these social workers and CPS agents, so that hopefully they can use this field guide as a tool to spot child malnutrition and abuse, and then further on steps of how to report it and how to do so in a trauma-informed way. And so, I'm really hopeful that that'll be a tool that Department of Children, Youth, and Families and their agents can use to help save some kids in our state.
Okay, very important issue. Well, we are just about out of time, but I want to give you each a chance to sort of give us a final observation or thought about having gone through a session, as I mentioned, also a special session now, a one-day special session. Just a takeaway. You glad you did this? You ready to come back for another year?
I am glad I did it. I'm ready to come back. I'm excited for the interim. I'm excited for the bills that I'm going to be working on during that time period. I have some energy ideas as well as affordable housing ideas already. So I am really glad that I ended up here. I think we had some big wins for the Tri-Cities this year too in the capital budget. So I'm excited to come back and see what we can do next year.
Okay.
I agree. I really love it here. I'm excited about it. I really love representing my constituents. I feel like it's their government, but I'm just the bullhorn for their voice.
Okay.
And so I love doing the job, but I love representing them more. And I try to carry that on my shoulder everywhere I go, and I try to do the best job that I can. And even though there's ups and downs, I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie, so there's a lot of adrenaline in this place. It took me about a week after the regular session to, come off that high, but no, it's been great and ready to come back. And I think now that we know the process a little bit better, that we'll be even better at it next time.
Okay. State Representatives Travis Couture and April Connors, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Enjoy your interim. Good luck in your next session.